you for talking to us. And I read that you started using, you got in touch with the Verbatim Theatre because of a workshop. How can you tell us a bit how you start getting in touch with Verbatim Theatre?
Yes. Well, I started off as an actor, and I also work as a voice actor on cartoons. So I'm very interested in the voice. Always very, I have to do voiceovers on documentaries and animation and advertisements. And I was very interested in the power of the voice and how much information is in someone's voice. And it was always very interesting to me as a performer when my friends would hear my voice on a show and they would say, "Oh, we heard your voice." And it's like, it occurred to me that the voice is as unique as a fingerprint. And there's a lot of information in the way we speak as much as what we say. So I'd already been thinking about this a lot. And I had some experiments with creating verbatim theatre. And then I went to London in 2000 and was living there for a year working as a voice actor and performer. And I met a wonderful director by the name of Mark Wing Davey, who was the artistic director of the London Actors Centre. And at that time, he had come back from working with a wonderful American artist by the name of Anna Devere Smith, who works a lot with recordings and makes quite political work using her body. Yes. You may know her work.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
So, but he was quite interested in the way she rehearsed, and she would essentially memorize the vocal print of people she'd interviewed by wearing headphones, listening along, copying what they said, memorizing everything, even their breaths and clicks, all the details. But Mark thought it was quite interesting the way she rehearsed. When she performed, she takes the headphones off, and it's a very complete performance. But there was something about the incomplete performance of having the headphones on, seeing the act of listening on stage that he thought was very interesting. So when he took the position at the London Actors Centre, he ran a workshop called I think it was called Drama Without Paper. And I've always been very interested in sound, and I was in London and I met Mark when he was auditioning actors for a new little company called Non-Fiction Theatre, which came out of that workshop. So I didn't actually attend the same workshop as Aleki Blythe, but I've certainly heard a lot about Aleki. But I met Mark at that time, and he passed on his notes, and I auditioned for that company, the Non-Fiction Theatre Company, and ended up working with them. And as far as I know, they were the first group of performers to actually take that technique of what I call headphone verbatim. I know Aleki calls it recorded delivery, which I think is a beautiful title. It's a lovely way to describe it. So I think through being a voice artist, I became very interested in that technique. And I made a show in London, and then I came back to Australia to continue working. And the thing that most interests me about it politically is the notions of mismatching. What happens, who do we listen to, and who gets, how do we listen to different people, who's allowed to say what? And I think it allows me to gently ask that question in my work. So for example, the second work I made using this technique was in response to some race riots that happened in Australia called the Cronulla Riots, which was essentially a kind of a tribal war between young men of Anglo-Australian background and Arab-Australian background. And on stage, I spent 2 years recording people from both camps, and then on stage I played with a lot of notions of mismatching. So I'd have actors of white Australian appearance performing the voices of Arab Australia and vice versa. And it just, and because of the headphones, I felt like it allowed the actors to do that without parody. And I feel like it's a great responsibility when you record someone's story. So that was very important to me and something I really like about the technique. So I guess the thing that has fascinated me about working with headphone verbatim is my interest in the voice, and also that ability to avoid parody and play with the notions of mismatch.
And you will edit. So after a long time of research, you edit the script first. I read from some of the excerpts in your website, the editors did not get a paper script, is it?
Yes, I've been very strict about that. I really feel like the script is audio. It's audio script. And I love that Mark's Wing Davies title of that first workshop, which I still have the notes from, is called Drama Without Paper. And I took that very literally. I would tell the actors, here is a CD. Now we work with MP3s, but like here is your script, and give them a CD, no paper. And they had to listen to it and kind of work it out so that I think if you see the words, you start learning the words. Whereas I wanted them to learn the way the words were said, like learn it as sound. So that was our rehearsal technique. But the more works I've made, the more complicated they've become. So I'm really interested in the way groups of people speak together, and how you can read status in a group, like who does the group go quiet for? Who does everyone talk over? I'm quite interested in mapping how that happens. So in my later works, I've focused mostly on group conversations. So there'll be like 5 people talking at once. And now I have to transcribe because it is too hard for the actor to work out, who says what. Yeah, but as much as possible, and I say, listen, look at the transcript to work out which is your character. And as soon as you know that, you take it away and just use your ears to learn the work. Yeah.
And so you will do the editing. You still did the editing, right? Of course.
Sorry, do you have the paper script by yourself? Or you do the transcriptions, or you just got the audio script?
Do you mean for me to work from? I use paper for me to work from, just because my shows have gotten more complicated. But my show on stage runs as audio file, so I edit in a program called Pro Tools, and you can even see here. This is me how I arrange my scripts. So I will have a color for a character. So like green is one character. This work is very complicated. It has 8 tracks that are running simultaneously. This is the work I just made with Urban Theatre Projects.
I saw that one.
What? But it was only a few weeks ago.
Yes, I came.
You came intentionally for 3 days.
Oh my gosh! I didn't know that. Oh wow! Oh.
I saw.
Thank you for coming.
Friday night.
So is this show?
Yeah, this is the phone tracks. Like the one it has 8 phone tracks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is working out. Yeah. But all my shows I will work out the audio on the wall, like a picture, like a storyboard. Yeah. And move things around. Yeah.
Yes. It's very complicated.
Well, it enables me to work from my ears. I'm trying to work from my ears, not from a playwright would normally work from the paper. I'm working from how things sound together. Yeah.
So usually I do all the transcriptions and I just put all the transcriptions on the table and cut and paste in the
Yes. Yeah, at the end I will get it transcribed, but not during like that. Yeah.
So what is your how is it? Of course, different people, even the same set of materials, different people, when you approach the same set of materials, they can have different takes and different ways of as in most of the documentary films, different ways of editing tells very different stories. So what about you? How will you approach? What will you look at when you need to start to edit the stuff? And is there any particular strategy you have when you?
Yeah, I guess I'm always listening as I'm recording as well. I feel like each interview leads to the next one. I think about the line of inquiry at the start, like before I start. I think documentary, it's very easy to end up with a lot of great material, but you need to find a way to focus it and have an arc, particularly talking about a play. So for example, to use the reference I spoke of about the race riot, my question to myself was, at the heart of every war is a love story. So I worked out an arc in my questions that I asked everyone. So I wanted to talk to everyone I interviewed had to have been involved in the race riot. That was a given. The other given was they had to be passionate about something. So those two things. And then my question started by interviewing them about the thing that they really loved. Because I think everyone is beautiful talking about what they love. So the audience, and that shape of, I interviewed people first about what they loved and then asked them, tell me about the day of the Cronulla Riots. Where were you? What's your story of what happened? And then I talked to them about the aftermath. You know, how does the community pick up the pieces and keep going? You know, because that event, I don't know if you remember, it was in 2005. It was just, the images of that race riot went all around the world. It was very embarrassing for the people of Cronulla. So how do you get past that? Because I think it's very easy to talk about the negative things, but like, I think the hardest bit is like, how do people pick up the pieces and move forward together? So I had those 3 stages, and I kind of have kept that shape in the work, that you meet all the characters talking about what they love, so you build empathy with them, and then you see their role in something that's very ugly. So yeah, I guess in that work, I had that question in my mind, you know, at the heart of every, is that true that at the heart of every war is a convincing love story? And so I tried to keep that shape because I really wanted, I guess my intent was to build empathy so that we couldn't just scapegoat the people that were involved, but we recognise the people that were involved. And we recognise ourselves in the people that were involved so that we are taken on that story and hopefully have insights that helps with the conversation of picking up the pieces.
I think it's always easier for me, out of my experience of doing documentary theatre works, is sometimes it is easier if there is a concrete incident, like what I said, in 1967, I will have a concrete series of conflicts, like you said, the conflict you mentioned. But when there is, when there are not such a concrete series of events for you to follow, is more difficult. So are there any experience like the one you did with the boxer? I think is there.
Well, the I'm Your Man, again, that on that work I set myself the task. As an artist, I always want a new challenge, as I'm sure you do as well. But my task was, a lot of documentary is talking heads, people talking. It gets boring. I wanted to have something that happened in present tense rather than looking back, something happening now. So I wanted to follow a boxer who was on his way for a world title quest, and I had a deal with him. I want to interview before and after every fight so that I can capture adrenaline on tape, and made a little pack so that he could have the mic on him and be training and doing the things he needed to do. So that was all happening in real time as I interviewed him. So for that work, I followed him on that journey. So the work was literally from over 18 months, him training, and the work takes you right up to the world title fight. And you don't actually see the fight, but the penultimate scene is a beautiful scene. It's him and all his brothers and cousins in the dressing room beforehand, and all that tension of they're trying to support him, and he's terrified, and the whole way through he's been very chatty, talking it up, but at that point he's lost his speech, and recording that room just gives the audience this amazing adrenaline rush. But that was a real through line. That work had a really clear spine of following Billy the Kid Dib on his quest to succeed. Because the thing about boxing that I find compelling, a little bit like being an artist, is that it's very public, your failure or your success. And the one thing that's really sure about being a boxer is one person has to lose, so 50-50. So it's like high risks. So my structure on that work was I was following Billy the Kid on his quest, but also interviewing other people that could be in a boxing gym who had failed on that quest. Or had succeeded, like 3-time world champion, and how they were living post-success. So it was sort of like you saw that real-time trajectory as well as these ghosts of the people that had been on that path before. And another challenge for me as a writer-director is how you frame the work. And for that I wanted it to be about not being in the ring, but what happens psychologically behind the scenes. What it is it to want to be the best in that space. So, setting it in the boxing gym felt really really helpful for framing and holding the work, in that everyone was training the whole time and all these characters could exist here. Yeah.
So have there been situations or examples that you you really feel that, wow, I couldn't find a story out of all the complex materials. Have there been situations like this?
Yes, all the time. I mean, I think one thing as a documentary maker, you have to live in the unknown, because you can have all these visions of like, I want to get this story, but like real life doesn't work like that, And I know with that boxing show, I wanted to get the world title fight, but it kept getting put off, and I thought I could follow two boxers towards each other to this moment in time where they fight, and so I could follow them, the loser and the winner. But it doesn't work like that. It just didn't work like that, and the fight kept getting put off, and the opponent kept changing, so I couldn't follow two trajectories. I think it's you have to be quite versatile, don't you? And
Yes.
and often, I think it's really important for me to have the question, but there's a lot of ways to answer that question. Yeah.
Because I think you start with just giving cards out to people, inviting them to phone to the number.
Yes.
So it's something that you can. I mean, it's a lot. There are a lot of unknown for you in the beginning. So was that a headache for you to figure out this scenario?
Time is my friend. So for this project, I had 2 years.
Wow.
So I like a long time to make a project. I feel like to go deep, I need time. So that work, I learnt that it is a big thing for people to call up and leave a message for someone they don't know. So on that project, because I wanted to map the night, I wanted to create find out who was awake between midnight and 6 a.m, what they were doing, as a way of mapping an area or the way an area sounded, and looking at community in a different way. So that was a little bit tricky, but on that project, I think it's just working out what the strategy is. I think a lot of the creativity is not just about how you structure what's on stage, but how you structure your process. So on that work, urban theatre projects are fantastic at supporting community engaged process, and so I had the resources to engage 5 young local artists that lived in that area that I wanted to make the work about, and they handed out cards for me, they spoke to people, they rang themselves. It's about getting the right relationships and getting the trust in place. But I think there is something about, like, I mentor a lot of younger artists, and like I think the process is a big part of the creative problem solving.
Yes, there's a lot of problems to solve for a documentary theatre piece.
Yes, and you have to live in that unknown, and keep revising your strategy.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes you do hit dead ends sometimes, and you just, it takes a lot of patience. But I think, I always recommend to people have a long lead-in time, because you will hit dead ends.
Yes. So, talking about the headphone, the way you did it, the headphone verbatim. So the actors, although they don't have a paper script, they will. You also said you won't ask them to memorize the lines, but somehow they need to know somehow where they are, how they are going to perform. Sort of, there's something as an actor they need to solve instead of just improvise on a stage. And so, how to make the balance, or how normally how much time you use for actor to rehearse? Because for example, in traditional conventional play, we say that roughly speaking, a page of dialogues we will use 1 hour to rehearse that. In your case, how much time you rehearse with the actors? And
I think it can be a little bit deceptive to think that because they haven't memorized it, they haven't done a lot of work. We have a very detailed rehearsal process, as long as a traditional play. So I would rehearse for 4 weeks, and then a 1 week production week. And they are learning kind of how to stay on the train, because once you press play, it's just, you can't control the pauses, you can't catch up with yourself, you have to, it's almost a bit like dance, I think, or playing a score. It's highly rehearsed, actually. I don't ask them to memorize it, and that's partly because I'm interested in the incomplete performance. I guess it's a little bit Brechtian. I want the audience to be able to see the gap. So, for example, if you were playing a character that I had interviewed, I would want them, the audience, when they see you deliver the lines with your headphones on, I want them to see you listening. I want them to think about listening and how they hear. I want them to see you. I want them to imagine the person you're playing or whose words you're relaying, and I want them to be able to imagine the person talking to them and the room they're in. So it's almost like a spirit medium experience that I'm trying to, when it's really working, that's what I'm trying to get. I'm interested in the gap, and I think that's why I'm interested in keeping the headphones and not getting them to complete the illusion like Anna Devere Smith, because I want it to be really clear that you are not pretending to be someone you're not. You are just saying, your contract with the audience is that you are saying the words of that person exactly as they said them, or as close as you can deliver those words. And that's interesting to me. So the way we rehearse, to get back to your question, is in great detail. We will sit round the table with a listening station, and we'll all be listening to the same things. And I expect my actors to breathe the same breaths as the person they're hearing. And that is quite interesting. An older person will take 2 breaths to say something that a younger person, you wouldn't even hear their breath. And often, because I'm interested in the mismatch, that young actor doesn't have to play old. They just have to recite the exact vocal print as closely as possible with as much fidelity as they can muster, and I can see the 83-year-old man on the 18-year-old body. I can see both. I can see them like that, and that, I guess it's very rehearsed, actually. And I really look for actors who have great ears. Not any actor can do this technique. And I'm also interested in how impossible the task is. It's interesting to watch someone do something that's impossible. Like if I gave you a recording of a 15-year-old girl from a different cultural background, or even let's just say a 15-year-old girl, you have a deep voice, you know what I mean? It's impossible for you to copy her voice, but you can play her voice with your instrument, and that's interesting as well.
Yes.
That seeing you fail is interesting.
Yes.
I get half of her and half of you, and that is interesting.
Yes.
An interesting tool to play with as an artist.
Yes. So about the first part of your answer, it seems like this device is also it's a reminder for the actors, but also a reminder for the audience. Yeah. Is it? Is it right to put in this way? Is a reminder of the audience that they are not speaking their own words. The actors, they are speaking someone else's lines.
Yes. And also dramaturgically, I feel like the work is about listening and how you listen. It's challenging how you listen. And visually, you are seeing someone listening. It takes a lot of concentration to listen that well. And you're being invited to listen. I think a lot of theatre is about what you see. And I'm really interested in taking people into this place of deep listening. And I think for the first 10 minutes of one of those headphone verbatim shows, the audience is like, what's going on? They're trying to work it out, but then they kind of stop trusting what they see and they start really listening. They go into this place of listening. And as a director, I love to watch that shift. Yeah.
So most of your works, you also do the directing, or all of them? Yeah. Because it requires a particular way of looking at the materials, right? So you always do the directing.
Yeah, I think I just haven't managed to see how they could be separated in this case. I think because I'm not like a script writer that writes it down, I'm working it out on the floor, and I always have, as I said earlier, I'm a slow worker. I work each one of these theatre shows are over a 2-year period usually. So during that time I'll have creative developments where I will, just have a week on the floor with cast and moving things around and seeing how it sounds in their voices, on their bodies. So I a lot of my writing happens through trying it out on the floor.
And I see when you, at least from the excerpts on the website, when you direct, you think a lot about where to put the play, to the whole setting of the play, and you always try to find a place that fits well with the script, with the text, the audio text, or the whole performance. So it seems that you not just use a neutral theater setting. You tend to use some more site-specific setting. Is it something of your?
I'm very interested in finding the right or the powerful marriage between the content and the form. Like I'm always looking for what those things mean together, and I think a lot of solving a work is getting that right. So I'm Your Man worked well between kind of the psychological space I was thinking of, being in the boxing gym, the place where you're out of the public eye and you're getting ready to step over the threshold. Stories of Love and Hate, we used a big seating bank that could have been at the beach, or it could have been in the western suburbs. It could have been either place. But more and more, as an artist, I'm interested in site responsive work. So using the site as documentary as well. So the last 3 works I've made, including the one you saw, The Nightline, which was in an abandoned restaurant. So the work was partly inspired by the site. And the work before that, I had a commission to make a work as part of the Commonwealth Games, and it had to be a work outdoors, and it's a very beach-orientated area. So I made a work designed to be experienced at sunrise, and the audio was synchronized with the stages of the sun rising. So I think as an artist I want to keep evolving. So I'm lately I've been moving away from making theatre works and taking creative documentary performance into other forms. So something I'm quite interested in at the moment is being very site responsive. And I also made a work at the end of last year called Cell 26, which is in an old prison cell, and it's designed to be listened to lying in a prisoner's bed. And all the recordings are with ex-prisoners and prison guards and High Court judges that have put people into that prison, so that all the voices are relevant to that, to meditating on that, at that site, and on a meditation around incarceration from the perspective of being literally in the spot of incarceration. And the theatre of space, that is one of our tools as documentary makers. It's powerful.
How did you find your subjects? It seems you cover a lot of different subjects in your past shows. Subject matters, I mean.
The subject matters or the people?
The subject matters. How did you find your subject matters? Is it partly from the commission body, or you initiate the whole things?
I always think for me it comes from curiosity, what I'm curious about, like the questions I have that I don't have the answers to. I feel like as an artist I always want to pursue things I don't understand or are fascinating to me. Yeah.
So you have done quite a number of works. So is there one that you feel particularly satisfied with? I don't want to use the word successful, but you are particularly satisfied with? Is there a particular one for you?
It's hard because they're kind of all like children by the end. I spend so long with them. I guess at the moment I could be sentimental about ones I've done in the past, but I really enjoyed the last work I made because I felt like it was something so different for me in terms of form. I think, but that's more about what I'm excited about at the moment than what I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm the wrong person to ask.
No.
I don't know.
Because every project is so different.
And I try to just keep looking forward. I don't think it's useful to keep looking back. And I think, every work you would never make the same work again. I don't think you can keep evolving the way you work even. I don't think the things that I did 10 years ago I would do now. I just, I feel like culture evolves and I'm evolving with it as a product of my culture.
My last question is about whether, of course, I as an artist myself, I think it gives me a lot of satisfaction to do a documentary theater work, although it's very exhausting, the whole process. Yeah, but do you think, apart from that personal satisfaction, do you think is of any social relevance to do a documentary theater piece, or itself documentary or verbatim theater form? Yes. Do you think does it have any social significance to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on a number of levels, I think it's community building, and I also think like just being, giving the people the experience of being heard and putting voices that are unheard into positions of authority. I think it can be really profound. And people sometimes ask me, do people get paid to be in your shows, but to be recorded, to be in your shows, question that in documentaries. But, I'm always very transparent, and people, I find, want to be heard, especially if they feel like they're unheard within culture. Like, my experience is that people are profoundly happy to be heard, even if they're saying something that's quite controversial, like in the Cronulla Riots show I mentioned, Stories of Love and Hate. It was interesting that those communities were so tense, those two areas of Sydney, that we couldn't do the show in a place where everyone could go. We had to take the show back to the communities where the voices were heard, and so we performed 1 week in the Shire and 1 week in the Bankstown area because we couldn't bring those communities together. And in the first season, the audience, they were very pleased to have their voices heard, and they said, when you go over there, they're going to kill you because we sound, so rational. And then the same thing happened here. This group said, what did they think? Did they hate it because we sound so, rational? Both groups, even though some of the things they said were very controversial, they just felt so heard. And I felt like that the act of listening and being heard, and the act of being heard are very powerful, and I think, I think socially there's great benefits in that, in terms of community building and creating space for conversation and empathy.
Yes, great, thank you. That's what David has also said. To start conversation this morning. I think David also said. Yeah, David also says this. I think is, for me, it's like my experience in 1967 is something like this. I think because after 1967, Hong Kong is so divided, the two part, the communist part, the non-communist part, and so I think it's good a way to create a platform for sort of a conversation between the two parties. Yes. I think it's important.
And to really witness things in a deeper way than journalists can sometimes. I think to spend 2 years with a story, and that allows for you have the luxury for a different sort of deeper listening to, whereas I think often in the media, people can become stereotyped and scapegoated very quickly and simplistically because media has to move so fast. But I feel like the artist doesn't have any advertisers to please. They don't, you can't buy the artists. The artists will go in and listen. And I think sometimes people trust artists more than media, which is an interesting position to be put in. But also that in terms of how much these works mean to participants, I am still close friends with people that have been in my works from many years ago, like the bond that they form with me, which I guess is a little bit artificial, but because I'm making a work, but I know it means a lot to people, and I've I've now been to a lot of funerals of people that have been involved in my work, because I did a work, intergenerational work with some older community members, and when I was invited to their funerals, there were photos from our shows, as part of their memorial. So I know the works, for the people that have been in them, have also been very profound. But I think there comes great responsibility with making documentary work, and I know Alana Valentine said this to me when I interviewed her, and I think it's so true that when you make a documentary work, you enter a relationship with the community, and that is an unavoidable thing. It asks a lot of you as a maker.